Now let's talk about some issues related to performance measurement in general. Ideally, you want accurate and timely performance measures that capture agents or workers or managers who are reporting to upper management their true efforts and what it is that they really did to help pursue the organizational goals. Ultimately, you're looking for their contribution to the firm as a whole. Now, there is no such thing as a perfect performance measure. You can't have a perfect view of their efforts. Otherwise, we wouldn't really have a decentralized organization. So broadly, we can think about three common issues given this lack of perfection. One is controllability. A second is the notion of alignment. And third, the notion of interdependency inside the organization. Thinking about controllability, basically controllability has to do with performance measure noise. Measures reflect something other than the employee's effort. In other words, the performance measure is affected by factors that are beyond the employee's control. This is a big issue for employees. It has significant implications. First off, compensation based on noisy performance measures provides less incentive to perform. It can actually be potentially demotivating. The return on an effort from the employee's perspective is uncertain. That means that they can try very hard, but if the performance measure that reflects their effort is influenced by something beyond their control, then their compensation is misaligned with what their actual true effort was. They're perhaps punished by the fact that something happened in the environment that was beyond their control. This means that in the future, they may realize that I can exert a lot of effort, but I may not get paid for it. So that leads to an uncertain environment and can be demotivating. As a matter of fact, this has implications for the level of compensation employees would demand in such situations. Because the uncertainty is greater, a firm might have to compensate the employee potentially higher to offset this risk. A second issue has to do with alignment. Alignment issues mean that measures fail to induce behavior that is aligned with firms' goals. Measures can be lack alignment or be not congruent in one of two ways. The first, a measure may be incomplete and does not influence or induce employees to perform holistically. Let's say that a measure really only captures two important tasks that the employee is charged with. In that case, the measure doesn't induce the employee to be a more balanced employee and perform both tasks. They, in essence, will perform just the task that's being measured. Another way in which measures fail to align the employee is that they induce dysfunctional behavior. That is, it might be the case that an action that influences the measure favorably is not in line with the goals of the firm. Let's say that a measure is enhanced by two courses of action, one that is desired by the firm and one that is not. Well, a measure that cannot diagnose which of the actions that brought about enhanced performance is difficult when it comes to aligning the employee with the organizational goals. The third issue has to do with interdependence. This is related to performance measure noise and the controllability issue, but it's a specific type. There are two general types of interdependence issues. First, one individual's effort and performance are a function of others' efforts and performance. In other words, some employee that is downstream is influenced by the performance of an employee that's upstream. And if the employee that's upstream doesn't do well in their job, then the downstream employee cannot do well in theirs. A second type of interdependence has to do with team-based settings, and that's where multiple individuals' effort and performance are difficult to separate. In other words, the measure reflects the team performance as opposed to any one individual. Now, one solution to help address some of these issues has to do with the measure choice. You can think about different levels of specification at which measures exist. There is the business unit level, so a very broad measure, versus a measure that's more specific to the individual or specific department. So let's look at the left-hand side here. When we use a very broad measure to measure and compensate individuals, the controllability problem is greater. The problem here is that the measures are not responsive to any one individual's actions. It's because we're talking about business unit performance as opposed to that individual. Therefore, the measure is a noisier representation of that individual's performance. So the controllability problem is made worse by a more broad or higher level measure. The alignment problem, however, is made smaller. It's less likely to distort behavior because if an employee is incentivized by a business unit level performance measure, then their actions will be naturally aligned with the business unit itself. Considering the interdependency issues, we have a mixed bag here. First off, if you use a business unit level, the incentive to cooperate with other individuals in the business unit is strong, and so some aspects of the interdependence problem are mitigated. However, the potential for free riding is significant. If an individual is compensated on business unit level performance, then it's not as important for them to try as hard as an individual because they can rely on the actions of others. On the right-hand side of this slide, we look at individual level performance measures, so something that's more narrow. And when we use a more narrow measure, the controllability problem is mitigated. It's made smaller. The measures are more responsive to the individual, and this is because there is less noisy representation of the individual performance. We're not talking about business unit profit or performance. We're talking about something closer to that individual. The alignment problem, however, is greater. Individuals are more likely to focus on their own performance measures, sometimes to the detriment of the business unit. And then the mixed bag of interdependence exists on this side as well. When we use an individual level performance measure, the incentive to cooperate is weak. An individual is being paid or compensated based on what they are being measured on. But the potential for free riding is minimized because the employee ultimately has more responsibility for the measure itself. So ultimately you can see that a firm faces many different trade-offs in considering different types of measures to offset these different issues associated with performance measurement. Controllability, alignment, and interdependence issues are never solved completely, but it's up to the firm managers to ultimately find the right balance and choose the right measures to address these issues.